bienvenidos a los de Zoom. Welcome to the Zoom participants. Entonces vamos a hacer esta presentación bilingüe, the most bilingual as possible, to make it more accessible to everybody. So my slides are in Spanish. Mis diapositivas están en español, pero I'm going to speak in English. So in order to not get like a short circuit in my head, I'm going to read, otherwise I won't be able to follow that easily. What I'm going to present today is a reflection about how PAR can be used as a mean to decolonize knowledge, and the work I did with PAR and both creative techniques in a project I worked with a group of indigenous women from the Andes. So I just want to start by saying that several researchers around the globe have opted to work through PAR and other participatory approaches with indigenous communities, due greatly to what we know, the long history of extractivist research done on indigenous communities that tends to position them as exotic, underdeveloped, or even as savage, So in this scenario, other participatory approaches really have the possibility to shift these power relationships and position indigenous groups as knowers and as agents of knowledge construction. So specifically about Andean women, it's important to mention that many of them have found formal educational context very challenging, given the social exclusion they face in the Peruvian society. Also, for decades, they've been excluded from the formal educational system, and although this is changing, still several Andean women find it very challenging, these contexts very challenging. So in this scenario, the collective and horizontal dynamics that are fostered through PAR can facilitate conditions for Andean indigenous women to actively engage in these processes of knowledge construction. Now, with regards to placing indigenous groups and community as knowledge constructors, it's also important to think about what are the indigenous ways of knowing in the Andes and how these are strongly tied to practices and ways of being in the world. Practices that are strongly connected to their surrounding environments. Just gonna move this, okay. For example, through the relationships they establish with economic activities, such as agriculture and cattle rearing. And many of these practices involve, for example, paying tribute to the Apus, which are the mountain deities, to the Pachamama, to the water sources. And all these activities are also tied to forms of cultural expressions, dances, songs, even theater. So as we can see, artistic and creative techniques provide a vantage point in that they are similar and connect with practices already existing in these regions. Also, just to mention, creative and artistic techniques provide an alternative path to express emotional experiences when words fall short, and embodied techniques can allow one to tap onto emotional experiences that are carried in the body. In a similar vein, community art expressions usually take root and emerge in contexts of social exclusion and in response to contexts of oppression. So in this way, community-driven art can provide a path to promote social justice and inclusion by mobilizing social change and creating avenues for participation, dialogue, and connection. So I want to go into this PAR project in which I worked with indigenous women. The participants were a group of Andean women from a town in the highlands of Ayacucho, which is in Peru, who had just formed a knitting association. So first we negotiated the focus of this PAR project during a familiarization phase, una etapa de familiarización. So the participants and I discussed our common interests, and I was interested in thinking about how communities can rebuild their lives in a post-conflict context, because this Andean region was strongly hit by the armed conflict. And the group of women were interested in organizing in a knitting association and overcoming the mistrust they felt among themselves and among other people in the town in general, and also to overcome the challenges brought by machismo, by patriarchal structures. So I proposed to them to work on a PAR project with the goal of exploring how their newly formed knitting association could be a means to confront violence such as racism, patriarchy, and economic violence, and engage in the discussion about how psychosocial effects of the armed conflict through breaking silences but also maintaining them, and always in ways that contributed to a better future for themselves and their families. And I presented this goal in our first collective workshop. So after deciding the goal of the workshop, we gathered in 2-day monthly participatory workshops using these creative techniques from April to December. And in our first workshop, we together, using a creative technique, decided what were the topics associated to this goal. So the topics that we finally decided to work on, you can see them listed here, but they are intragroup elements, knitting and what it meant to them, machismo and patriarchy, town and community life, ethnic identity, racism and discrimination, and armed conflicts and reparations. So the workshops followed a general structure in which we had an icebreaker, then 2 main activities, mostly based on creative techniques. And these creative techniques allowed for a discussion of different points of view about the topics that were mentioned in the above. And this would be the data of the analysis of the data, of the knowledge generated about women's lived experiences, and this would be like a first level of analysis. All these discussions and the product of the creative techniques were registered by photographs, transcriptions. I also recorded the discussions, and then I analyzed it myself in what would constitute a second level of data analysis. But this was strongly influenced by the first level of analysis that occurred in the workshops with the women. So this is a little bit about the project. So how can PAR and creative knowledges be a means to decolonize knowledge? So what does it entail to decolonize? Decolonize, for me, entails challenging or altering structures and dynamics that sustain power asymmetries and that are rooted in our colonial past, but that run along racial, class, and gender lines, and that impact processes of building and generating knowledge and practices. So in a way, for me, decolonizing knowledge, and I realized through this research, entails shifting our researcher roles and fostering more horizontal relationships. Why? Because PAR entails negotiating and deciding collectively with participants several aspects of the research project, including its focus. However, it's not easy for community participants, such as Andean women, to tell you openly all the time what they're interested in, what they need and what they want, because of how power fluctuates in that relationship with the researcher in a very asymmetrical way. So as researchers, we need to find ways to level that field of that conversation and foster settings and processes where we can get to know better the participants. Even if, not even, but sometimes this entails, for example, knitting with them in the market, or going to see their animals, or accompanying them in the festivities, but being part of their lives and familiarizing with them in a very horizontal plane. Although that doesn't seem researcher work, it really is a very important part of the work that is done. So this really makes us wonder, and it made me wonder, what does it mean to have a researcher role in PAR that can foster decolonizing knowledge? And for me, several times I felt like I was moving between and straddling between being a researcher who sought to facilitate a process, but without showing too much about myself, and on the other hand, establishing a more genuine and human relationship, which is more bidirectional. So almost 30 years ago now, Michelle Fine asked us to work the hyphen. And Tara Blanche and Hamber also spoke about creating a third voice that is neither the researchers or ours, but the intersections, not only the researchers or the participants, but an intersection of both. But in order to create this third voice, we need to let go of this alleged scientific neutrality that is expected not only as researchers, but as psychologists. And it's important to show aspects of ourselves to the participants. In this PAR projects, participants wanted to exchange ideas with me. And they complained when I was the only one asking questions, they openly complained, and they said that I was squeezing their minds. I was exprimiendo sus mentes. So you can see this in the following quote. So I was asking them, what other value do you need to work in a group? And they'd say, oh, but you have to engage us, señorita. We are the only ones being squeezed. And I was, and the other one said, yes, you're squeezing us. And I was like, well, I have an idea of what values you need, but I want to know your ideas. And they were like, well, we already told you our ideas. Now we want to know what you think. So decolonizing knowledge, I think, also entails sharing a bit of who we are, because it's not only all the time that they are sharing a lot of things about themselves. So this really requires placing ourselves in a more vulnerable position. But also, the role of language is important, like how PAR processes occur are important, and here the role of language is key. So for this PAR project, I started learning Quechua, which is their indigenous language, and although most of the workshop took place in Spanish, I presented important information in Quechua, and I tried to I tried to promote and invite them to speak Quechua as much as they could, both inside and outside the workshops. And when they realized that they could speak Quechua and that I understood a little bit of Quechua, they really felt surprised and they really felt happy about that. So for example, this is a picture of one of the role plays I facilitated and which the women did in Quechua. I've been asking them to do things in Quechua for months, and I think after the fourth month, they said, okay, we're going to do something in Quechua. And it was such a lively workshop and such a lively role-playing compared to the others, because they could speak in the language that comes from their heart and in which they feel more comfortable speaking. And I think this conference makes us all realize also how important it is to speak in the language that we most feel comfortable in. So I think the use of Quechua also shifted power relationships in the workshop, because while they were doing this role-playing, I didn't understand most of it, and they were laughing about the jokes, and I was like, what are they laughing about? And I had to wait for the translator to tell me, and power relationships really shifted during this role-playing when they were using Quechua, and I felt a little bit left out, and I felt a little bit uncomfortable, and it's important to grapple with those feelings as well. But also speaking Quechua helped them connect with traditional sayings and knowledges that are passed on from their fathers and their grandfathers and their mothers and their grandmothers that don't come out that easily in Spanish. So, for example, around Ayin Causay, which means in Quechua to live well, and all the connected symbolism around living well in Indian communities. But also what we talk about in the PAR processes is important. For instance, we discussed a lot of times the memories they had about the garments they knitted and how these were connected to the children they had and how they knitted while they were pregnant, and the colors they chose, because colors have a particular meaning and carry particular symbolism. For example, red always so that you can avoid el mal de ojo, so that somebody doesn't look at you and give you the evil eye, so you always have to use red, but also using more clearer colors, so there is a lot of symbolism attached to that. And also, as you can see in this quote, knitting, I discovered, is really a way to connect them with their natural environment, because a lot of the things they knit come from the animals they raise. The yarn comes from the sheep that they raised. So in this quote, you can see I am asking the woman about a sweater, and I'm asking, why is this sweater important to you? And she says, well, because it's natural. The yarns, those yarns I have spun, I have twisted everything. You spun this yarn yourself? Yes, I made it. Since I had the materials, I made it this way. So you did it. Did you buy the raw yarn from someone else, or was it from your sheep? No, it's from my own sheep that I raised. Oh, so from the sheep to the sweater, I tell her. You've been part of this whole process. Yes, señorita, all of it. They also spoke about how the local market had become a place where they could share information among the women, and many of them passed by the market and where they had their shops, and they exchange information there, as you can see in this quote. If they have any doubt, they go to the market, since they go to do their shopping. Oh, in the market they solve many questions about knitting, I ask. We teach and we learn. Sometimes we know the stitches by heart, because we fall asleep with our knitting. It's probably already in our memories. So as you can see, PAR has allowed us to highlight how Indian women's knowledge construction processes were already taking place in this town. And just to end, finally, what does creative techniques contribute to decolonizing knowledges? Well, they generated really rich discussions that I think otherwise might have not emerged, such as the one about the changes that have been taking place in the town because of la modernidad, or modernity, such as paved roads, the use of cell phones, paid jobs, and how paid jobs, for example, are detrimental to reciprocal practices such as INI, in which there's a reciprocal exchange of work. But also through creative techniques, they spoke about projects that were taking place in the town and that did not bring development and well-being, such as a dam that they were going to construct to take their water away from their communities for agro-industrial production. So in this conversation, they say, yes, señorita, there is a threat from a transnational company that wants to take away our lands. They want to take away our water. And I say, your water? Exactly, our water. They're going to try to make a big pool with our water, and by doing this, all our animals and all our cattle rearing will fall to the ground. But I have heard that others are in favor of this project, I say, because they say it will bring progress. They say maybe progress for others, but not for us. For us, the water sources are in danger. As you can see there in this drawing, this project that they were opposed to was called Pampas Verdes, and it's written there in black. And the other one, which they favored, was written there in blue, which is Irrigación Caracha. So these creative techniques facilitated and allowed them to discuss experiences and issues that directly affected their lives. And I think that without the use of these techniques, these conversations would have not taken place. So just some final reflections, and with this I'll finish. Powering creative techniques, I think, have an important potential to decolonize knowledge, but in order for them to do so, I think it's really important that we as researchers position ourselves differently in these processes, and we need to be willing to connect in a more human and horizontal way with our participants, sharing who we are. And this reposition might facilitate processes by which we can share, but also they can share more openly their ontoepistemologies, that is, who they are, how and what they have learned, taught collectively, and by which we can listen more carefully about these processes, also engaging in them more fully. And I think I've went way over my time, so I'm just going to leave it there. But thank you.
Si me sale mal, tú me corriges. Sí. Bueno, buenos días con todos, con todas. Mi nombre es Gino Grondona. Vengo de América Latina.
My name is Gino Grandona, and you come from Latin America.
Yes, and this may work. Yeah. Voy a tratar de leerlo en inglés. Yo no manejo mucho inglés, pero acabo de hacer una traducción para poder explicarme a toda la audiencia, a ver si de entrada enmarcamos mi trabajo, ¿ya? Tú me corriges, ¿no?
Yeah, no
my central thesis is that the dominant capitalist heteronormative except hegemonic system is not only sustained by the practice of power, but also by a design. That is, our problem is also a problem of the design of the modern colonial war, capitalist war. Yeah. My work is aimed at searching in ancestral knowledge, conocimiento, yeah, knowledge, wide lines for other designs of the world and for life. I call this undisciplined roads for the community psychology. Oh, impresionado. Entonces, yo tengo dos experiencias que mostrar sobre la aplicación de la chacana andina.
I'm bringing two experiences that I want to show you about the Chacana Andina.
Bien. The chacana andina represent the Andean indigenous cosmovision, yeah, has a totally composed for four sides. Impermanent and recurrent cycles that account for all vital, organic, human, and cosmic processes. ¿No? Okay. Entonces, esa chacana tiene ya un lado que está el poder y la comunidad, lado rojo,
This chakana has a side that is related to the power in the community. That is the red line, the red side.
Está el conocimiento, el saber, el conocer, aquí.
This knowledge, this being, this knowing, it's here, on the blue side.
Está el querer, el amor y la geobiodiversidad en la parte verde.
El deseo, el love, and this relation with the nature in this green side.
Y está entonces la sección propia del hacer, la producción en la parte amarilla.
And this yellow part is the working, this doing in this part.
Okay? Entonces, this is the chakana. Is the totally here. ¿Ya? Está en junio, ¿qué es junio?
Junio, yeah.
Junio,
June.
septiembre, diciembre, marzo.
It's June, September, December, and March.
In recurrent cycles, yeah? All the life in this. Yeah? Family, community, chakra, el campo, ¿cómo? La chakra, la Pachamama, la totalidad. ¿Ok? Está lo complementario, el respeto, la gratitud y la reciprocidad.
The compliment, the respect, the grateful, and el último, ¿cuál sería?
La reciprocidad.
Reciprocity. Yeah.
And this chakana la utilizamos para hacer los distintos proyectos y procesos de trabajo con las comunidades.
We use the chakana to work with the communities for develop the process with the communities.
It's another methodology.
It's
The first, la primera fase, the first phase es encariñar. ¿Ya? All process, first step is encariñar.
Encariñar es como si fuera el sentimiento, ¿no? Como el
claro,
afecto,
el
¿no?
afecto,
Yeah,
exacto.
it's a kind to be welcoming, to hold the community, to create the bonds with the communities.
Luego viene el conocer, el conocer.
To know the communities.
Aquí. Luego viene el crecer, todo crece en comunidad.
Yeah, grow up, raise in the communities.
¿Ya? Y luego viene la producción. ¿Ya? Entonces, nosotros hemos hecho investigación en colabor con las comunidades indígenas siguiendo esta metodología. ¿Ya?
We have been developing work with the communities, indigenous communities, working with these new methods, innovative methods that we have been working with these communities.
¿Ya? Entonces, así fue el inicio de esto. Comenzamos así, haciendo investigación de saberes ancestrales, ¿ya? Recuperación de saberes ancestrales, armonización de saberes ancestrales, utilizando la chacana, y esto no lo inventé yo, esto lo aprendí con las comunidades.
I have been learning with the communities, and these methods, it's based on the communities. We started doing our activities with these methods, the chacana, with the indigenous communities that I have been working with.
Entonces, desde esta chacana sale una metodología de investigación, ¿ok? Luego, voy a saltarme algunas cosas.
This chacana, it's the orange of our methods of researching with the communities.
The community Andean, Quichua, nacionalidad Quichua, Quichua Nation, el pueblo Cayambi. And, bueno, puedo ir. Luego comenzamos a trabajar los planes de vida de las comunidades.
We have been starting with the plans of life with the communities.
Superponiendo la chacana in the territory. Okay?
Yeah. It's like we're trying to overlap the chacana with the communities, try to see these relations with the communities.
Exacto. Ya, según el ciclo se superpone y se identifica los lugares de la chacra, los lugares de la comunidad, ¿no es cierto? Y se piensa el ordenamiento territorial desde la ancestralidad, vinculándolo con georreferenciación y tecnología, ¿no es cierto?, del momento actual. ¿Ya?
Yeah, it's like we try to use the Chacana with the geography of the communities, working with the communities to see where these ancestral knowledge are located geographically with the communities.
Yeah. Entonces, después, ya, esto fue evolucionando, ¿no? Ahora, esto tampoco lo inventé yo. Hay una indígena que estudió agronomía y luego se hizo su maestría en sistemas de información georreferenciada.
Oh,
¿Ya? Y por eso es que luego empezamos a trabajar de ese modo, buscando el cruce, ¿no es cierto?, entre ancestralidad, ¿no es cierto?, y conocimiento tecnológico para entender el territorio de otro modo.
I didn't create this method, these relations with this technological stuff. What the creation was indigenous women that did her degrees, undergrad degree about agriculture, and after that she did her master in technological science, and then he brought her knowledge, her ancestral knowledge, linking with this technological approach.
Y luego, entonces, además de la lectura del territorio, se comenzó a trabajar en los proyectos y los planes concretos para el desarrollo de la comunidad. Y se comenzaron a trabajar en la misma Chacana, ¿no? Lo que era la comunidad, lo que es la familia, lo que es la gratitud, la producción, todo, la chacra, ¿no es cierto? Cómo se cría la chacra, cómo se cuidan, ¿no es cierto?, los ecosistemas, cómo se cuidan los ríos, las aguas, ¿ya? Y empezó a generarse el plan del plan de vida, ¿no es cierto?, y los distintos proyectos que derivaron de eso, siempre armonizados en la Chacana. Todo, para que tenga sentido cultural, debe ser armonizado con la Chacana, si no, no sirve.
Knowing better the community, using the Chacana, and then they work with the communities, try to map the knowledge of each part of the Chacana and make the relations about the plans of life that are related of each part of the Chacana with the communities. It's like trying to make the relations with what is the purpose of the Chacana, what happened in the communities, and what communities want to do to develop the new aims related to this, with the Chacana, yeah?
Finally, algunas reflexiones, ¿ya? Aquí hay algunos temas, ¿no es cierto? Desde mi propuesta no se necesita, ahora hay un debate ahí, hay una discusión y obviamente hay distintas posiciones. Ya mi posición, ¿no es cierto?, tiene que ver con que no necesitamos entonces una psicología indígena, ni una psicología intercultural, ni una psicología decolonial. Lo que necesitamos, dale.
Yeah, I want to share with you some reflections. The first step is that we needed a psychology indigenous psychologists, intercultural approach, and the colonial way of doing. Yeah.
Claro. La propuesta es indigenizar la psicología comunitaria, ¿no es cierto? Interculturalizar la psicología comunitaria, decolonizar la psicología comunitaria.
Yeah, we need to indigenize the community psychology, make intercultural the community psychology, and decolonize the community psychology.
Y eso en tres temas centrales: lo interepistémico, de interepistemic, ¿no? Lo decolonial y lo intercultural, ¿no es cierto? Como tres cuestiones. En lo interepistémico, los debates, los diálogos, los aprendizajes mutuos con las comunidades. Tenemos que interepistemizarnos, digamos, ya diálogo de saberes, ecología de saberes, etcétera, etcétera. En lo decolonial está la problematización de las categorías conceptuales que utilizamos en la disciplina y lo limitadas que son, y la decantación, ¿no es cierto?, la sedimentación colonial que tienen nuestras propias teorías de entendimiento, ¿no es cierto?, para trabajar. Dale, y en último, dale.
The epistemologic way, it's that we need to question the knowledge, and we need to make real that we are learning with the communities. That's important, this relation that it's that is made between the people that are doing community psychology and the communities. The colonial dimension is we need to question some concepts and approaches and methods that we are developing community psychology, and try to make this kind of recovery of the historic and the historic memory and the memory of the territories that we are working with.
Un concepto central es la existencia.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the core concept related to social existence that the communities.
O sea, luchamos por resistir, pero por sobre todo por reexistir.
Yeah, it's like it's the fighting for existing, but resisting too. It's like this relation with existence, with resistance.
And then this is all.
Yeah, it's everything here. Yeah, we are decided to resist and for everything to re-exist other 530 years.
Thanks. Sí, ¿no?
Okay, my name is James Moura. I'm a professor at the University for International Integration and Afro-Brazilian Lusophony in Brazil. I'm so happy to be here with Núria, Gabriela, Gino. It's our first symposium, encounter that we are doing together. And I'm so happy to create this kind of perspective that we have in Latin America and different parts of the Latin America, and how the indigenous knowledge could be powerful to decolonize, indigenize the psychology, and the community psychology. First of all, I want to locate geographically where I am and where the communities that have been working, the indigenous communities that have been working are to. I think the first conception that the people that are not in Brazil have about Brazil and indigenous communities, that they are located in the Amazonia. The Amazonia is this part, and there, that it's like a central, it's a tropical part of the country. And of course, there are a lot of indigenous communities there, isolated indigenous communities that the Bolsonaro tried to exterminate, murder, making some process of violence because they accept that the miners could enter in these locations and these territories. Then there are a lot of violence against these isolated indigenous communities in Brazil. But I want to present other perspectives about the indigenous communities that are located in the northwest. I'm part of the state of Ceará in the northwest. This state have 15 indigenous nations that I want to pronounce their names. It's a form of respect and visibility of these trajectories. Anassé, Gavião, Canidé, Cariri, Tremembé, Tapeba, Genipapo, Canidé, Pitaguari, Calabaça, Carão, Tapuia, Cariri, Tabiba, Tapuia, Potiguara, Tabara, Tupinambá. And these indigenous nations have different knowledge, but there are some interconnections about these standpoints. And we try to work with participatory action research with these indigenous communities about the mental health and how the social services, because in Brazil we have a kind of national health system, and how these health services could aggregate and decolonize and indigenize these mental health services with these communities. And when I think about mental health, we're thinking about hegemonic conceptions that are created in an Eurocentric perspective. There is a kind of colonial conceptions that we are divided between mind and body, and mental health represents these divisions that our mental health is only related to the mind, our mindset, about these conceptions, about psychological stuff. And when you think about mental health, it's this concept, it's usually focused in mental disorders or suffering or abuse of alcohol and other drugs, like the old word, how does the acronym, it's how do you say, Organização Mundial de Saúde, it's in English it's WHO, yeah, it's, for me it's so difficult to make these translations of the acronyms, yeah. Yes, and there's a hierarchical of knowledge that psychologists and psychiatry, they usually perceive themselves like in a superior position when we compare with the productions of knowledge of other communities. And there's a process of objectification of indigenous people as like without these relations that Gino and Gabriela tried to present, that is how we can create a new knowledge or a new perspective with these communities and developing and producing knowledge. And when you think about the negative impacts about the indigenous mental health, we need to think about the decolonization process. There's a everyday discrimination and prejudice against indigenous communities and indigenous people in Brazil. There's a process of tutelage of the state that try to indicate who are indigenous and who aren't indigenous, because if a group or community are recognized as indigenous, they could receive more social services, health services, and then there is a kind of pattern that is created not by the communities, by the state. And then the idea is how we can change the state and to make that these trajectories are important because of their trajectories. There are a lot of violence linked to land ownership because there's a kind of so much conflicts that are related to like the wind farms, that's a sustainability process, but happen in a process of invasion of the territories of the communities. Then this kind of green economy, it's not so green, it's not so respectful with the indigenous territories. There's criminal organizations for drug trafficking that is entering and invading the indigenous territories, and there is a process that it's historically of the persecution, threats, and assassinations of human rights leaders and indigenous leaders in Brazil. Almost every week we have a murder of indigenous leaders in our territory. And there's a relation between violence and coloniality. The coloniality, it's a colonial normative that we are constituted, that our society is constituted, and this happened because of these productions of hierarchies and historical violence because of the colonization. And there is a kind of legitimization of this process of violence. Then I want to share with you some of the speeches of indigenous allies and friends and colleagues that I have been working with this participatory action research, like a friend in Tremembé community. Besides, there's still symbolic violence, as we can see from the catechizing and ideology imposed us. And in Brazil, we have originally 2,300,000 indigenous people that were murdered because of the colonization period. Nowadays we have 1,300,000 indigenous people. Then there's a decreasing because of this violence that happened with the colonization. And you can see this indigenous deny. It's another code that an indigenous friend said, that you can see this indigenous denial from the very beginning of the colonization. What spaces do the colonizers and the indigenous people occupy in the society? All the violence that have done to my people, all these atrocities that the colonizers brought, I'm assuming they did this to me. We live in this process of subalternization. And this violence is sexist, racist, and the indigenous women suffer more violence because of the intersectional lens and how the coloniality could be sexist and is sexist too, as an indigenous Brazilian woman said of the Camarão Jaguaribara nation. In the massacres, they killed the men and raped the women, turning women into reproductive slaves. Unfortunately, we have this tragic history to tell of how the women participate in this violent transformation. And when you think about slavery, it's common that we think that slavery only happened with black people, but it's a process of slavery that happened with indigenous communities too, of course. We need to present there is a visibility of oppressions because in Brazil, it's a colonial country that we faced several cases, and there's a lot of African that were kidnapped. Almost 5 million of African people are kidnapped. Almost 700,000 of Africans died on these ships that captured them, and indigenous women put together said. And the Brazilian populations are already born out of this giant colonial violence with black slavery and indigenous slavery. Then this is a context that we have been faced, the indigenous communities have been faced, and then when you think about indigenous community mental health, I use some 3 tasks that Martin Baró presented, that is de-ideologizing the reality, recover the historical memory, and strengthening the virtues and the knowledge. And when you think about these communities and the indigenous communities, there is a strong bond with the nature in a respectful manner historically, because this colonial process happens almost, 522 years ago, but these indigenous communities are resisting with these strategies, that is strong bond with the nature, with this historical memory, recover the historical memory with the indigenous museums. We have 2 indigenous museums in Brazil that they try to map and to maintain their knowledge, and the other adults that are recognized as like a source of knowledge and more related to the orality that they could share. And there's a process of the idealization of the reality with this kind of black, indigenous, and political coalitions. Now we will have elections, then we have more like black candidates and indigenous candidates. Each state in Brazil now has indigenous candidates because they need to occupy the politics and the parliament, because they realize that they need to work together and they need to transform inside the parliament and the federal and state government. And this is a kind of strengthening in the virtues or in the knowledge related to the agriculture, the food, the cultivation of their own food with the seeds. And there's these connections with the spirituality that is so uncommon for the psychology, that how we can connect our knowledge with the intuition, with this spirituality, and how it's important that there's some presence here that we don't see, but they are part of our lives and they are part of our trajectory. And the community festivities, that is an important moment that the communities are together to create like these community joy, and that create these comprehensions that it's important to be together, to enjoy and to have fun and to pay respect about their trajectories. And the indigenous art, that it's a moment that there's a kind of production in different language and different manifestations about what could be the art and what is the space of the art as a process of strengthening the virtues and the knowledge. And the rituals, it's their process, like Gabrielle and Gino said, we could heal the space, heal the community, heal the groups, and it's important because mark some processes that it's important to highlight and to emphasize, and the community connection that we usually work with circles is a Freudian method, but it's not Freudian method, it's the indigenous method, that it's important to see all the faces with the same position in a horizontal perspective, and then the circle make this process concrete and real. And the organizations that are constituted, like Gabriela mentioned, that it's important to organize and to mobilize their next steps to move forward for more rights and respect and their trajectories. And I want to share these photos, that it's the coexistence, the joy, and the shared life. This is my two sons here, Sereno and Rael, because as Gabriel and Gino mentioned, we are human beings too. Then it's important that these connections need to be true. Then it's like, I need to share my life, I need to share my family with them, because we all in this world, and I'm alive. I want to raise my kids with this comprehension that we are part of an occupied and violented country, and this country performs so much violence against these people that originated in these territories. And with this intention, I need to be not a community psychologist or professor or research, but I'm a person. And I'm a person with a family, with kids and wife and friends, and with some colonialities that I reproduce, but I need to be open, to be questioned. And then this is the idea about how you could decolonize and indigenize our community psychology, and decolonize and indigenize the mental health services and our approach. And thank you so much for sharing with you.
Buongiorno, sono buongiorno. Antes que nada, first of all, I want to say that I'm extremely honored to be with these beautiful people, con esta gente tan linda, estos jóvenes que han trazado un sueño para aquellos que ya somos de otra generación, ya vamos saliendo, y que me voy a salir con muchísima felicidad de saber que tenemos personas jóvenes como ustedes, activos y promoviendo visiones que da esperanza que sí va a cambiar el mundo. Así que estoy muy emocionada y a lo mejor hasta las lágrimas me salen. Bueno, también como Gaby, mi presentación está en español, and I will speak in English with the dominant language, but Spanish is also a dominant language, so there is no change whatsoever. So let's just do this and try to understand each other, which is the most important thing. So I want to share my life journey, actually, because it has been a commitment for many years, since I was young, just outside of the university, bachelor's degree and so on. always committed to work with indigenous communities, and it became my life journey, so that's why I call it Travesía de Vida. And where is the thing to move it forward? Here? There is an arrow, right? Esta. Okay, gracias. So this was my beginning of my commitment to work in indigenous communities. This was a community in San Juan Chamula, Chiapas. And at the time, I continued to use play as a very important strategy to network, primarily with children and youth, but also with adults through theater, community theater. I became fond of the book written by Huitziga, who wrote a book called Homo Ludens, and he describes how we create culture through play. That's where we begin our first possibility to create the world that we imagine. And through play, we can also practice this possibility to understand the world that has been created and to create the world that we want to generate. So through play, first of all, I started linking with children in this community, San Juan Chamula. And it was very interesting. I was studying in Germany at the time, and also used play with children in Germany, using their own ways, traditional games and songs and things like that, and then trying to understand with the children in San Juan Chamula what their games and what they wanted to play. With the German children, they were all competitive games, where there was who wants to be the king, me, and everybody trying to be the first one. And with these children, it became dances, traditions that they see in their festivities, ceremonial tales and legends that they played always together. And when I tried to make a switch, okay, let's bring what the Chamula kids play to the German kids, and these were kids in rural areas in Germany, in the Alps, in Bavaria, and vice versa. Quality and spirituality. Then after that, I went to another community in Oaxaca. It's called La Ventosa, which is in the Istmo de Tehuantepec, in the small part of Mexico that connects with Central America. And I also work with children there as well as in Chiapas in the Lacandon rainforest, children and youth. So the strategy, as I said, is co-creating knowledge and praxis through children's play, primarily also building, as it was shared here, affective conviviality with them, so as a primary methodology, true, not used because you want to do your research, but because you truly engage in affective relationship with the communities that can only be generated, as it was shared here, through exchange. I share my life, you share your life, and being in their communities with commitment, not for 2 weeks or a month, but for life, Whenever you can come back, you live there, you spend time with the community and share your life with them. So that's how you start building these affections, obviously. With children and youth, making them the protagonist of their own stories, of life, of what they wanted to see happening in their communities. So I think I already showed that. Let me see. Oops, I'm coming back here. Okay. This is a photo also from children in the highlands of Puebla, who, for them, the practice of traditional dances is a primary activity, very important. They are trained over the years to maintain these dances and become one of the most important ways of playing the dances of their cultures. I'm coming back again. I didn't bring my glasses, so that's in La Ventosa, in the Istmo de Tehuantepec, there was a huge threat at the time in the 80s with the oil that was petroleum that was being extracted from the ocean in this community. And the Mexican government built a huge refinery there, brought also German scientists and technical people to create, it looked, you know, a very rural fisher-based community that all of a sudden at night looked like Manhattan was present there with the refinery lighted up and doing extraction to the ocean. And those people, they were living from the ocean, you know, eating from the food of the ocean. That has been their ancestral dedication. And the refinery was completely damaging the ecology of the ocean. Sometimes you will wake up and the oil had spilled because they were failures in the system, and then they were not anymore able to fish. They had to go and work for the refinery. And then you started seeing, you know, alcoholism, domestic violence, based on the frustration that, and they would tell me that, you know, we didn't ask petroleum to come here, and they have damaged our lives. So, you know, this is the same thing than dying already. So they were in a very critical state. The children's play were representing the end of the world. You know, they were playing, and we will go to the supermarket and buy toys that, that they will sell for very few money, so that they could buy it all the time. And I will ask them to play anything they wanted, and it was all about catastrophes before the spill happened. You know, it was like, it was so strange that all the children thought, and we are all gonna die, and they are all gonna kick us out from here. So they were already seeing what was going to happen. The Mexican government started threatening them to be displaced, but they banded together and strengthened their culture, fought themselves to bring, you know, music back to the community, ceremonial practices, and bonded together to not allow the government to displace them. I came back 40 years later, just last year, and they are still there. The refinery could not be kicked out, but they are still in their community, and they are still fishing and taking care of controlling that the part where they live is clean and that the petroleum industry doesn't affect their ecology. They take care through their own traditional means to protect the ecology. So I have shared that already. This is now, however, a new wind industry, like James also shared, is going on in Brazil con la industria eólica, because there is a narrow piece of earth there, so there is a lot of wind going on from both oceans. And foreign capital is being attracted, you know, and the government is still allowing, even now with López Obrador, who is playing the indigenous protector role, but in reality it's doing the same, bringing neoliberal industries and threatening to create a train that will cross the isthmus. And as you can see in this picture, the ecology is also it's an ecocide. The birds are being killed through these machines. The sound is horrible, and the ecology it has been altered incredibly with this industry. So they are fighting it. They're constantly fighting against neoliberal progress by means of the slogan of progress and civilization that the hegemonic coloniality and the capitalist hydra, like the Zapatistas say, is constantly provoking. In the community of Chiapas, I work also with children in an after-school program. There is only one school that serves the whole community. When I first came by means of one young person that I met who introduced me into his community, I will talk about him in a minute. The school was only served by 2 teachers who were Mayas, but Setzales, who speak another language, who have been trying to teach in their communities where they can speak their own language for decades, but the Mexican government, most likely as a very conscious strategy, places indigenous teachers in communities who don't speak the language from the communities and switches them. So they go to other communities where they don't speak that indigenous language and have to end up only speaking Spanish with the children as a means to kill their language. So these teachers were only 2, and they had about 100 students in the school. When I went there and said, I'm a psychologist, and if I can be of service here, I would love to cooperate with you. Oh yeah, immediately they gave me a large room, and they said, we're going to send you kids we're having trouble with. Almost like 70% of the kids that showed up in the room. I had all of a sudden like 70 students. Of course, all are having difficulties in the school. If the school system is destroying their culture, is not teaching them anything valuable that they can use for their own life, it's colonizing them with a reality that doesn't belong to them. So they resist it, and they don't learn. And that's epistemic disobedience right there, like Mignolo said, But there are warriors, and they are totally right to resist it. So I started working with them. In this culture, dreams are very important. When people start accepting you, and they don't tell you, señorita, for once, bravo, until they start calling you your name. That's amazing. That when you get to that stage, it is a very difficult work, I know. But when they accept you, they start asking me, what have you dreamt? And then I realized that that's what they are asking each other all the time. Instead of, hello, how are you, is what have you dreamt? And then they start telling each other's dreams. There was an anthropologist who, in the end, became one of them, for real. He married a woman there and had children there, Robert Bruce. And he actually did volumes of dream interpretation with the Lacandones. It was very rich, an amazing resource that is not really known. So that's the way that I work with children, creating circles in an after-school program and telling them, what did you dream? And they were, telling all the dreams, and all of a sudden they started telling me mythological dreams that I have seen in mythology books in other places, and they were stamped in the pyramids, who are very close to their communities, Bonampak, Yaxchilan, and Palenque, built a triangle. They are inserted right in the middle. So we started writing their dream. The new colonizers are the evangelists from the US, and so they don't allow them to remember their legends from the past because they tell them they are the devil's legends. So, you know, the Mayas were venerating the devil, and you should not learn anything from them. So there is like a repression of that knowledge. You know, when I ask people, what are the traditional legends, they said, oh, we don't know, we don't have any. But then the children all of a sudden started telling them, you know, to each other, and we wrote them in little books and make masks to represent it in theater performance. And this is a búho, an owl. The owl, the animal owl, has a huge meaning in this culture. You know, it has a wisdom, it has an ancestral meaning that you also see it in the pyramids. We went to the few stores, because it's a very, very small community, to the few stores where they had cardboard boxes, and we made masks with them, you know. At the end of the project, when I asked them what did they like the most, they said, your boxes. We were just collecting boxes, and I was always bringing boxes to create, you know, the scenery or the masks and so on. And that was intentionally so that they can use their own resources. You know, I did bring some brushes, but those that you can buy in closer areas with not a lot of resources, so that it can be reproduced by them again. And so when we were working on the dream, they started talking about the god of the dead, Kisin, who came to the town and invaded their dreams. And Kisin wanted to separate, divide them, and make the town into two, who will then fight with each other. There is a river, the Lacanha River, and that indeed happened. You know, there is conflict in the community, but the Kisin, who is the traditional Mayan lord of the dead, who you even see in the pyramids and so on, and they brought the name Kisin. As a depth psychologist that I am, you know, looking at the unconscious, means the government, because the government is creating policies in the community that is dividing them with territorial struggles with the Zapatistas, you know, in order to control the Zapatistas to not get access to other towns. The government granted the Lacandones the stewardship of the Blue Mountains, which is one of the largest ecological zones in Mexico, like the Amazons, with very rich biodiversity. And they indeed, you know, their main quehacer, their main praxis is to preserve the nature, which is a sacred, is their temple. That's where the gods are. You go to, they embrace trees and talk to them and meet creatures in the forest who tell them in their dreams how to preserve the biodiversity. That's what also came in the children's dreams. And one of the children told me, oh, my father also does theater. And so I met his father, Mario Chambor, who you will see here in this slide. Mario was recruited by anthropologists from the US who were investigating the story of the Red Queen in Palenque as a proof that there was governesses in the Mayan traditions, that women were also ruling for some considerable significant time. And so this is a very interesting story of the red goddess, La Reina Roja, and they recruited people from the communities who will play it in the Mayan language. And he found amazing people. I mean, that you can see it in the internet. It's called La Reina Roja. It has magnificent performances because they ended up also artistically recreating the costumes with materials that these anthropologists gave to them. They are very artistic people. So Mario, when he wasn't performing in San Cristobal, offered his time to teach the children how to perform and brought a legend that we put together in a community performance. So the children played the story with their masks and so on, and we taped it. I brought a camera, and that was another methodology. I used a participatory videography. They could use the camera, whoever wanted to take it and make shots of whatever they wanted, and then we put it all together in a video and in YouTube or Vimeo so that they can even see it with their phones and so on. So this story is, I don't have time to show it, but it's in the internet. It tells, as I said, the Kisin comes, divides the town, they band together, cross the river, and blow strongly, strongly with their lungs so that Kisin and the ghost flew to another planet. And then they could live happily and a meteorite falls on them and kills the bad vibes and they have to live in another planet. So also analyzing this, how, astronomical, there are very cosmological, the Mayas have always been very cosmological. They talk about meteorites and the moon and the sun and the gods and the goddesses as their main cosmovision, all inserted in nature, and that they are sent to another planet also, this concept of we are not, just earth-centered, but very eco-centered, inserted in a universe. We're not the only ones. So all that knowledge was in the children as we started doing this approach. It was very hard for the teachers to make the children come to school. But when they saw me coming down from my hat, in the afternoon, they were all hiding because they didn't want to go to school. And then they shouted, "Ahí viene la psicóloga!" And they were all So that was my first step, la psicóloga, they wouldn't, all the time was, la psicóloga, la psicóloga. I said, but you know what I told them? This is the first time I feel so proud to be a psychologist. It's the most beautiful welcome I have ever had in my life. So after that, they call me Nuria, And they started getting more and better familiar with me to the point that they told me sometimes like, cálmate, Nuria, cálmate, because I went, come here and come there, let's do this, let's do that. So the clash still that you always are conscious of, how our own coloniality that is inserted in us, even if you are working hard to not reproduce it. Your behaviors of, the city world, we have a plan, we have to do this, we have said we're going to do all this today. Cálmate, maestra, cálmate, psicóloga. Now I'm not Nuria anymore because I'm departing from their life world, So that was very interesting. Mario put a beautiful legend about the coexistence with the animals of the forest, about a hunter who kills monkeys to eat them, because they used to eat monkeys, and the monkeys gather together and show him a lesson. They abduct him and make him live with them. Then he marries a monkey woman, has monkey children, and learns to live with them in harmony. So this is really a legend, a very classic legend that tells how important is their coexistence with all beings. and that the humans are not the rulers of the Eurocentric, US-centric hegemonic world, you know, where the Anthropocene rules instead of the Ecocene. I came to the community when I met Ernesto Chancayunquin in San Cristobal de las Casas, and he was at the time 17 years old. He brought me to his community and, you know, worked as a guide for about 3 weeks. And when we climbed the Bonampak pyramid all at the top, he told me, you know, I have a dream. I want to become an engineer of natural resources. I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I want to do that. So that's my dream. Well, then all of a sudden, he wasn't in the community. He was doing his education as an engineer of natural resources. Then in the process, the government put a university right there in the rainforest, which is called the University of the Rainforest. And because no teachers who are not from there want to live there or be there, then indigenous teachers started occupying that university, and they are now those who teach them. And all these children are coming back to their communities and bringing their knowledge there. So Ernesto is going to present today at 2:45 with all the other youth I network over the years. My time is coming up. I just wanted to share briefly that Mario came with me to one of these international conferences in Miami, and there he said he had a dream. He wanted to do a festival, a cultural festival in his community. It took 3 years, but he made it happen. It took a long time because the community was in conflict, and conflict had to be worked through to bring together this project. Here they are sharing their cosmovisions, Mario and his brother, who became a lawyer, and a Kumeyaay friend who also I work with in the northern part of Mexico. Okay, so these are the youth in the end that I networked with, and we wrote a book together, thinking what does indigenous psychologists mean to them, and each of them wrote a chapter. In the process, they created their own organization, and they are going to present at 2:45 together. We wanted to bring them here. Some of you, like, thanks to Gino and others in this conference, at least one of them could fly from the rainforest to Oaxaca. They are all gathering at the Universidad de la Tierra that we talked about yesterday and present directly from there. For one of them, it was the first time he took a plane, and he was so nervous, always with WhatsApp telling, what do I do, what do I do? And now he's like, oh, he says it has been his most beautiful experience. So thank you to all of you who cooperated to make it happen.
We don't have much time left. There's only 6 minutes left. Solo quedan 6 minutos, pero si hay algún comentario o pregunta, if there's any comment or question, we can use these 6 minutes. So. Tess, sí. So the question she's asking is, an issue that's important to think about is how can we make it so that academics and researchers such as ourselves don't have to translate the voice of indigenous communities, and so that we can find a way so that they can share them themselves and they can find spaces and avenues to share their voices themselves. So yeah.
Well,
Not
today at 2:45, you'll see, you'll hear them
yeah,
directly.
exactly.
And
And,
I wish they could have been here, so we need resources from these associations to
yeah,
give them the chance to pay their tickets and bring them here, you know?
yeah.
But we didn't get that.
I think this is a need of concrete actions, like because in the universities, the professors, the psychologists want you, okay, you can see here, we can do this together, but we'll need to look in for resources and concretely, financially, and this is the idea to support them with them. And I think as common psychologists, it's like I think we need to learn with them and support them in their struggles, steps, and actions. I think we learn more than yes, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
A ver, adelantando una pregunta a esa tremenda, o sea, una respuesta a esa tremenda pregunta, yo diría que a mí me pasa lo siguiente, yo diría que hay una cuestión que tiene que ver con las intencionalidades políticas que tenemos los distintos actores que participamos acá, ¿no? En el caso que yo presentaba esa experiencia, desde esos lugares, esas comunidades no están pensando en transformar el mundo, aun cuando lo están transformando desde su lugar. ¿Ya? Y no le están pensando en difundirlo a nadie porque están viviendo su resistencia y su reexistencia propia. En cambio, una que de pronto está vinculada a esas cuestiones, entiende, ¿no es cierto?, de otro modo y tiene otra intencionalidad, genera puentes de comunicación y socializa, difunde estos debates, estas experiencias para abrir otros caminos, digamos, ¿me entiendes? Entonces yo diría que en algunos casos es verdad que la gente está ahí y quiere poner sus temas, pero en otros casos a veces somos nosotras las que estamos poniendo los temas, porque a nosotras nos interesa que eso se conozca, que eso se difunda, que esa experiencia no quede ahí, ¿no? Entonces, en la medida que nosotras tenemos la posibilidad de pasar, conocer, viajar y estar en distintos lugares, vamos nutriéndonos de eso y nuestra responsabilidad política es difundirlo y devolverlo y ampliarlo y hacerlo crecer, yo diría. Entonces, son como posiciones distintas. Es verdad que a veces se niega y se invisibiliza a los propios actores, pero también en otras ocasiones ellos o ellas no están preocupados de estos debates o de estas cuestiones, ¿ya? Entonces, por ahí.
I'm going to try to translate that a little bit. I'll do my best. um, so it's for Gino, it's about the political intentionality, and for him, sometimes these indigenous communities are already transforming the world without them knowing they are already transforming the world. And sometimes they are interested in sharing what they're doing and getting their voices out there, but sometimes they don't. They just want to keep doing their thing and re-existing and resisting without sharing it with everybody, but just involved in their daily life. So we have to kind of differentiate when there's something, and this is my own, this is not Gino's, but when there's something in them for them to come here, and when like their pragmatic reality really, they don't get anything from coming here, and for them it's more important to live in their daily lives, and finding practical means to survive and thrive in their everyday life. So sometimes there is something in for them, and sometimes there's not. And for them, practical, material reality is very important. So there was a question, comment in the back.
I wanted to say something similarly. I'm Susanna, and there's an opportunity cost to come to a conference.
Yeah.
The time away from family, who's going to pay for the child care, who's going to do the work when their actual work as opposed to our work. So I think there are, as he's saying, there's opportunity costs. But I do think that there should be some kind of I don't know, maybe you already talked about that, but I think that encouraging people who are spending funding to categorize what the funding goes for. And it can be simple, university, community, and then we can get more elaborate after that. Just a thought.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
But you know, I really think that the, the same opportunities we find when we come to places like this, las mismas oportunidades que nosotros vemos de beneficio de estar aquí juntos y el beneficio que yo tuve de aprender de ustedes, pues como yo sí los he traído, y por ejemplo a Mario que estuvo conmigo en Miami, nada más les cuento una historia para, creo que es rápida, no tenemos tiempo, pero estábamos en la cena con SCRA, la Society for Community Research and Action, y habló la encargada de la educación, una Black Caribbean beautiful person, who talked about education in Miami and what she did for children there. I was translating him, and he was so excited to hear. I need to meet her. I need to meet her. And when she finished presenting in a large scenery there, everybody control and applauding, he stand up with his traditional clothing and went to hug her, you know? And she was like, oh my God, who are you? And I ran like, oh Mario, maybe the police is gonna grab you to arrest you, you know? Like you're gonna kill her or something. And she said, oh, bring him right at the exit, okay? I tell you, I'm gonna be in that room or something. So I brought, Isaac Priletensky was there and he was fascinated with the response that she had, you know? So I show you where she is. We went there, they connected, and she visited the community to see his work with children. How cannot that be opportunities that you offer by connecting and networking, the same that we do, they're the same, you know, those resources need to be shared and opportunities. So even if not all of them come because of children or whatever, there will always be a representative, you know, that then networks and brings this back to their community. It was a beautiful story. So I couldn't have even dreamed that that kind of outcome will have happened. But he managed it himself, you know. I mean, we don't have to do that for them. It's just putting the opportunity.
Well, we're a little bit, no? Yeah. Until they kick us out or you have to leave to another one, yeah, let's just go for it.
Can I ask in Portuguese? I'm going to translate this. Acho que é mais fácil. Mas, na verdade, é uma pergunta um pouco mais sobre a experiência pessoal de vocês, né, como psicólogos dessas comunidades, e quais os sentimentos e de que forma vocês lidam quando, por exemplo, algo que vocês pensaram, idealizaram, quando a gente fala de pesquisação e participação, tem as nossas expectativas ali também, e quando algo que vocês idealizam nesse sentido de uma ação acaba não dando certo, ou as pessoas falam, para mim isso não faz sentido, vocês, eu não quero que nem a Ana falou um pouco, eu não quero saber de mitos, eu não quero saber das histórias, enfim, como para vocês, como profissionais, os sentimentos e como vocês lidam diante disso.
Okay, it's Laura is asking how are your feelings related to the work with these communities that you, for example, you plan something and the plans don't go well, what the expectations that you have before because you try to propose some activity, but the activity couldn't be interesting for the people that we are working with. And then it's like, how do you handle these feelings and expectations and frustrations that,
Yeah, I think that for me it's been mostly be very open and trust the process, you know? Be very open with your intentions, with what you're there for, what you're interested in doing, how you're interested in knowing people. Hang out with people a lot, just spend time with doing daily things and be open to sharing who you are. And if they trust you enough, they'll say, I don't want to do this. Like, this makes, like, once with the women I was working with, I tried to do collages with yarn. And they were like, this is my work. Like, I work with this, and you're cutting it up. For them, it was kind of insulting that I asked them to cut yarns in little pieces and make a collage with it. Like, I could have made a sweater with this, they told me, you know. And I was like, okay, we're never going to do that again. But I think it was really important for them to feel that they trusted me enough to tell me something like that. And so it's really just kind of being open, and if you have to change, you have to change, but what's the priority? It's like you have to have very clear what the priority of that relationship and of that project, even if it's a PAR project or whatever project it is. And if you have that clear, then you can be flexible around everything else. You know? So it's
And I feel so grateful when something does happen. It's because I realize that they are being sincere with me, and they are performing power relations that represent they don't want it, and they show me what they really want. And this is amazing, because when you think about psychologists and community psychologists, we plan something, and the people, there are some moments that they accept because we are psychologists, or like we have this kind of hierarchies that the society reproduces, and then I'm so glad that they show me they are doing a different thing. It's amazing. Of course, we need to handle our frustrations, and it's part of our lives, and the discomfort need to be cultivated when you think about the coloniality, these power relations, yeah?
Ahí tú me ayudas de nuevo, ¿no? Bueno, si entendí bien la pregunta, ¿no? De sentimientos a uno, ¿no? Cómo uno se siente con eso, ¿no? Yo diría que en lo personal a mí me pasa que por un lado agradecimiento, ¿ya? Agradecimiento porque siento que puedo conocer o tener acceso a un conocimiento privilegiado, a unas prácticas privilegiadas, ¿ya? Y creo que eso nos debe llamar a como una profunda reflexión y humildad, porque estamos en conocimiento de algo ancestral que está ahí y que mucha gente no tiene la posibilidad de conocerlo. Entonces, eso yo diría que es una cosa, ¿no? Y la segunda cosa que yo comentaría es que a mí lo que me pasa con eso es que yo creo que finalmente los que estamos y las que estamos, digamos, día a día tratando de transformar este mundo, ¿no es cierto? Tenemos que de alguna manera darnos cuenta que si uno no se transforma, uno no transforma, ¿ya? Y esto para mí es una apertura a la propia transformación, que es la base de otras transformaciones.
So he's very thankful. He feels really thankful because it's actually a privilege to be able to access such ancestral knowledges. And you feel very humbled by the possibility of accessing these knowledges. And I love this, what you just said, is that one has to be transformed. One has to be willing to transform oneself in relationship with communities, because if you don't transform yourself, you're not going to be able to transform or make changes in the world around you. And this is very transformative work. It's really like, whew. I resonate with a lot with Gino says. It's like, I'm so thankful for how much I've learned with these women. It's like, yeah, I feel like how much we learn from them and how much they learn from us. It's like, oh my God, I've learned so much from them. It's like what I feel they've learned from me is like so little compared to so much what I've learned from them. So it's, yeah.
I think there's someone in the Zoom. I think she's asking about the book of Nure written with the indigenous communities. I think she can book online indigenous psychologists in the era of the colonization. Yeah, and yeah.
Pero sí me gustaría también hablar de que no siempre es color de rosa. Uno también se inserta en los conflictos. Y con mucha intensidad porque somos foráneos. Y bueno, porque yo soy psicóloga profunda y trato de ver qué más hay abajo de este conflicto. Por ejemplo, la historia de los ghosts, de los niños, creó un escándalo, porque no debieron haber dicho la palabra quisin. Entonces había parte del pueblo que es evangelista y que lo veía como una difamación de Dios. Y vinieron a protestarme que no debía haber usado la palabra quisin. La dijeron los niños, no los debiste haber permitido. Entonces me trajeron este conflicto a mí y a los próximos días empezaron a pelearse entre ellos, la división del pueblo también, ¿no? O a decir, fue la psicóloga la que metió el conflicto, ¿verdad? Porque te vuelves pues ahora sí que la ovejita negra donde pueden enviar su catarsis. Y lo que yo aprendí es no tomarlo personal, es parte de la dinámica, ¿no? So I'm saying that you can also be inserted in conflict with what you do. You know, I also learned, wow, I mean, I should have been conscious of the conflict of the evangelist against the traditional knowledge. The children are bringing this also as epistemic resistance, right? But I should have been conscious of the conflict that will be generated. And the story was about the conflict in the community. So, you know, all of a sudden I became the venue to release their anger with each other. And it was the psychologist who, oh my God, how can she be a psychologist when she's talking about our internal desires? Because it was internal desires coming out, you know? And we have to be careful. I mean, that was a lesson for me too. I have to learn from this. But I also don't take it personally. I felt like running away, you know, like, oh my, I'm leaving, I'm packing, I'm going. No, stay there, you know, stay there. And I apologize to everybody. I apologize. I should have been more sensitive. I should have listened. That some parents were telling me, don't use the word kissing, use the word ghosts. And in the end, we did change it. But the word kissing came in the children's books. It came when they were acting. Also, I couldn't say, no, that's a taboo, you know. So it's conflict also, you know. You are inserted in conflict and in affections, you know. And in the end, if you pass that challenge, stay there, face the marginalization. For a while, I was then back to be the foreigner who, you know, la señora. Ya no señorita, pero de usted, you know, outside again. I had to fight back. Yeah. Be humble, apologize, sit alone for a while, you know, they wouldn't serve me food, get hungry. You know that is a consequence of the war too. So, you know, that's...
Thank you so much for everyone here. Thank you.